continents is fallen down. What did the scripture say when the continents of the king was fallen, And anyhow, we won't get on that. Chapter 17 of Ezekiel, and starting at verse 1. And the word of Jehovah came to me, saying, Son of man, put forth a riddle and speak a parable to the house of Israel. And you shall say, Thus said the Master Jehovah, the great eagle with large wings of long pinions, covered with feathers of various colors, came to Lebanon and took the top of the upmost twigs of the cedar and carried it to the land of the traders. In a city of merchants he placed it. That's verse 1 to 4. Now, who's the eagle here? Is that the United States going into Iraq? Because some people jump on the prophecy bandwagon. They say, there it is. We went into Iraq. We're the eagle. Y'all are saying nothing or no?
No.
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 My answer is no, and so is my dog's answer. Ruff,
Okay.
ruff.
But here's the important thing. The eagle is a symbol of pretty much every empire. There's the Egyptian Empire had its eagle. The Babylonians had their eagle. Of course, the Romans had their eagle. The Russians have an eagle. The United States have an eagle. So the idea of the symbol of the eagle is pretty universal with any empire. So basically, in this case, it would be Babylon. The eagle is Babylon. Well, what's going to happen? Who's going to get carried away? Because we're going to look at this in the historical context here of what actually happened. So let's take a peek. If somebody wouldn't mind reading for me, because if I fumble through the screen, I'll have more problems. 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 17. And that way in post-production, I can edit it in. So that would be 2 Kings chapter 24, verse 17.
I'm there.
And 2 verse 20, please. Thank you, Gary.
17 to 20.
Yes.
Sovereign of Babel set up Mattaniah, Jehoiakim's uncle, to reign in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Hamutal, and the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did evil in the sight in the eyes of Jehovah, according to all that Jehoiakim did. For this took place in Jerusalem and Judah because of the displeasure of Jehovah, until he had cast them out from his presence. And Zedekiah rebelled against the sovereign of Babel.
Well, see, this was the problem. He rebels against the sovereign of Babel and aligns himself with Egypt. And this prompts the second invasion. So, what you're dealing with in these 4 verses is actually the historical event of what's going to happen to Judah, the puppet king that Babylon placed on the throne because he rebelled and aligned himself with Egypt. That's going to have repercussions for Jeremiah because Jeremiah is going to get carried away down to Egypt when we go over there because of this. So that's the actual, not only Peshat, but the actual historical reading. You can find people that will try to assign different things to this, but the immediate application is the king of Judah. It's just the usage of cedar of Lebanon. And we're going to talk about trees. Trees are going to be very interesting as we get into the study here. Because and we talked about the vine in chapter 15. So we have vines, trees, eagles, and a lot of symbolism. I'm going to propose to you now, and you'll see it as we progress in this. I'm going to propose to you that a pagan 1,000 years ago would have understood biblical imagery better than a 20th century Christian sometimes. Anybody want to challenge me on that?
Not at all.
Uh, and why do I say that? Because paganism uses the similar inner metaphors and pictures, uh, trees and different things. If you read the pagan mythologies, you will find that the imagery is exactly that in the scripture. So you don't have to be a scribe or a real educated person if everybody in the culture has a basic understanding of the imagery. It's when you get to modern Christianity, the concept of, well, Frank, we take the Bible literally, and therefore, you know, you're going to run into some problems when you have metaphor and allegory and these word pictures in Hebrew. If you try to insert a literal meaning into the text there. And it's just interesting about some of the imagery. We're going to get to that. So let's look at another verse. Let's go back to chapter 16 of Ezekiel and verse 29. Okay. And what does it say? I'm looking at it now. Oh, and it reads, and you increase your whorings as far as the land of the traders, some translations say merchants, of the Kasdim, and even greater, and you were not satisfied. So again, the land of the Kasdim is the land of merchants or traders. Why are they called that? They are in between China and the rest, Egypt and the rest of the Mediterranean world. They are the path through which goods from the east, India and China, pass and other things go east. So they profit from the two-way trade. Also, at the time of Ezekiel and Jeremiah, Babylon serves as a port city so you can sail out and to the Persian Gulf and down to India. Okay, everybody got that? Any questions on that? Because I got one more verse to bring up in relationship to these verses here. Any questions so far? We doing good?
Yes.
Okay, I have no background there. That's interesting. Let's look at Daniel chapter 4, verse 30 to 33. Daniel chapter 4 will reinforce the idea of who the eagle is and the tree. Who wants to pick that up? No takers? I guess I'll go.
I'll read it.
I'll-
Is it Daniel
okay.
4:30 through 32?
Daniel chapter 4, verse 30 to 33.
Okay. The sovereign spoke and said, is it not this great Babel which I myself have built for the house of the rain, by the might of my power and for the esteem of my splendor? The word was still in the sovereign's mouth when a voice fell from the heavens. Sovereign Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken, the rain has been taken away from you, and you are driven away from men, and your dwelling is to be with the beasts of the field. You are given grass to eat like oxen, and 7 seasons shall pass over you until you know the Most High is ruler in the reign of men.
Okay, he's had a vision. Daniel interpreted the vision, and things go on great for a whole year until his ego gets the best of him. Because in the vision, he sees a tree that's strapped with a big iron band, and the tree's cut down, and the stump is left strapped with an iron band. Well, what is it? That's the tree representing Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, and he grows hair so long it becomes like eagle's feathers. If you follow all of chapter 4, this is Nebuchadnezzar's conversion experience, if you would. Because when you get to the end of that chapter and he's restored to in his right mind and he's restored to his kingdom, he's a different man. But you see, he represents an eagle in that his hair grows long like eagle's feathers and a tree. It's all in there. Go look at that chapter. So that's the imagery. And that was the interpretation of Daniel, and that's what happened. Now, as it relates to these verses here, these first 4 verses, we still got to look at a couple other things. That would be Deuteronomy, Devarim, 32, do the right thing chapter. Chapter 32, verses 10 and 11. Any takers on that?
I have that, Frank.
Thank you.
Deuteronomy 2, 10.
Chapter 30, chapter 32.
32, I'm sorry, I thought that's what I said. 32, verse 10. He found him in a wilderness and in a wasted, howling desert. He encompassed him. He made him understand. He watched over him as the apple of his eye. As an eagle stirs up its nest, flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, bearing them on its wings.
Okay, here we have the imagery of an eagle, but this is what? Yehovah, because he's in another place he says, I've taken them out of Egypt on eagle's wings, right? But if you notice verse 10 of chapter 4 of Devarim in the Torah, he found them in a howling desert. What does chapter 16 that we just got through reading say? Here again, the Torah gives you the prophecies that the prophets unpack in more detail in a couple of verses. But the imagery is consistent. And that's what's important to understand stuff. The metaphor of Yehovah being an eagle or Nebuchadnezzar being eagle. What's the difference? One,
What was the verse? Sorry, Frank. What was the verse in Deuteronomy chapter 4?
Deuteronomy chapter 4 was verses 30 to 33. I mean, not Deuteronomy, that was Daniel, excuse me. Deuteronomy is chapter 32, verses 10 and 11. You see 10 where it says he found him in a howling desert?
Yes, I got it now. Thank you.
Now, you go right over to chapter 16, he says, I found you in the, I mean, the imagery is the same, except that chapter 16 goes into a lot more detail. So we see in many of these prophecies Moses is giving by the inspiration of Yah to Israel before they even enter the land. Why? Because of Israel's spiritual condition, because of their heart. Let's look at one more reference to these first 4 verses. Jeremiah chapter 49, if someone would please look up Jeremiah 49, verses 20 to 23.
I have it if you want me to read it.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it.
Jeremiah 49, verse 20. Therefore, hear the counsel of Yehovah, which he has counseled concerning Edom,
Yeah.
and the purposes he has purposed concerning the inhabitants of Teman. The least of the flock shall drag them away. He shall make their pasture a waste before them. The earth shall be shaken at the noise of their fall. There is an outcry. Its noise is heard at the sea of reeds. See, like an eagle, he flies up and spreads his wings over Botzrah. And the heart of the mighty men of Edom in that day shall be like the heart of a woman in her pain.
Okay. Now the question is, again, the picture is Yehovah as an eagle, but he doesn't deliver Edom to anything but judgment. The question becomes, is it Edom in the days of the prophet Ezekiel and Jeremiah when the Babylonians return that he enters into judgment with, Or is there also a secondary meaning in the last days where he enters into judgment with those who have come against his people? Because if we have a first Exodus, the scripture tells us in Jeremiah 16, we're going to have a second Exodus. So if there's certain patterns and metaphors and pictures, we should find them in the book of Revelation. So we find a lot of similarities there. Any thoughts or questions on that?
I think it's
Yes.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Bozrah, what is modern day Bozrah? Is that
Well,
Lebanon?
there's two Bozrahs. That's the question. The ancient Bozrah is in what would be today southern Jordan. That would be Edom, but there's also Bozrah in Iraq. Isn't that interesting? Now I can go to the modern day metaphor and say, who's the nation whose symbol is the eagle who comes against Iraq? And there's a lot of things interesting there. Because if you read Isaiah 63, it says, who's this who comes from Bozrah or Edom? It's talking about the second coming of Messiah. So Jeremiah 49 references it. So that's my question is, when does Yah enter into judgment with Edom? Because the ancient Edomites have been mixed in with Jews and Arabs today. Who's an Edomite? How do you tell? I mean, we could spend a long time on the idea of who is Edom today. The rabbis say it's Christianity, Roman Christianity. Some people say it's, well, the Jews. They're not really Jews. They're Edomites. There's that spin. So the question becomes, well, who is Edom? If we're going to play the DNA card, where is Edom? Are we talking two levels of interpretation, one in the ancient past and one in the future? So
I think also if I could point out in Jeremiah 49, you
go ahead.
referenced the eagle reference here in Jeremiah 49 verse 22, but just in the previous 6 verses, he likens Edom unto the eagle. In
Well,
verse 16 of chapter 49, you make your nest as high as an eagle. From there, I'll bring you down. So you have the Edom likened to the eagle, and then 6 verses later, Yehovah is likened to the eagle as he's judging Edom. So it's like you have, even in the same chapter, like two meanings in
yes.
a way.
Who's eagle? Which eagle? How do we
Right.
interpret this? Give me a vision. Help me write a book. But you're right. The metaphor there, the picture imagery is Edom and Yehovah. But in the verses I mentioned, it was specifically Yehovah judging Edom. But thank you for bringing that out. That's important. Appreciate that. Okay, we're going to pick up at verse 5. We stopped at verse 4. And he also took some of the seed of the land, remember which land, and planted it in a field for seed. He took it by many waters, pay attention to this, and set it like a willow tree. There's an imagery of a tree. Willows like lots of water. We're going to talk about that. So it grew and became a low spreading vine. Now, wait a minute. I thought he planted a willow tree. Now it's a vine. Remember, Israel's the vine. Its branches turned toward him, and its roots were under it, and it became a vine. Oh, so the willow tree turns into a vine. That's pretty. And brought forth branches and sent out shoots. Verse 7 now. Look at this. And there was another great eagle, because Garrett mentioned 2 eagles back there in Jeremiah 49, Edom and Yehovah. And there was another great eagle with large wings and many feathers. And see, this vine bent its roots towards him and stretched out its branches towards him to water it away from the beds where it was planted. That all goes back to the rebellion of the king that the Babylonians had put on the throne. And we read about that already. He gets his eyes put out, he gets taken to Babylon. But we're talking in verse 7 there about Egypt. Now, if we're going to talk about the vine planted by many waters, let's look at that application for Babylon, for Egypt, and for the future. Y'all think that might be interesting? Verse
Yeah.
8. Yeah. Verse 8. It was planted in a good field by many waters, to bring forth branches and to bear fruit, to be a splendid vine. Now let's look at a couple of verses here. Somebody please go to Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 13.
I'm there.
Okay,
51:13.
right.
You who dwell upon many waters, great in treasures, your end has come, the measure of your greedy gain.
Okay. If you read chapters 50 and 51 in Jeremiah, it's talking about judgment of Babylon. But Babylon as a nation doesn't technically fall. Yes, it falls to the Medo-Persians, but it still retains its importance and its trading and all of this. It's not like wiped out. So we're going to have to understand which Babylon, because there's a Babylonian system that persists to the end of days, and that Israel has been scattered by and into many waters. Why? So the seed will, like Israel and Egypt. When Israel goes down to Egypt, there's 70 or 72 people, depending how you want to count it, and they come out a nation. Israel in the diaspora is allowed to grow in many waters. Somebody read for me Revelations 17:15.
Okay.
17:15.
Yes, Revelations chapter 17, verse
Go
15.
ahead.
Okay. And he said to me, the waters which you saw where the horse sits are peoples and crowds and nations and tongues.
Does anybody need an interpretation?
Well, I sure don't.
We have Israel scattered by ancient Babylon, and Israel is still scattered by Babylon. Rome, whose symbol was the eagle, scattered Israel. Rome, if you understand the image in Daniel chapter 2, from the head of gold to the legs of iron, is all one beast system. It started in Babylon and it will end in Babylon. But Babylon is just not one place. People are looking for New York City. They're looking for Rome. They're looking for, uh, whatever, to be the big city. I remember before Saddam Hussein fell, several years before the United States got into that engagement, there were guys writing books that Saddam Hussein was going to rebuild ancient Babylon and it was going to be the seat of the Antichrist. I just wish I'd have bought one to prove that somebody believed that. because they sold by the bukus. So somebody's always looking for, oh, this is Babylon or that's Babylon. It's Rome. A lot of things are Babylon because Babylon is the political, religious, and military system whose head is the prince of the powers of the air. Yes, it has a religious component, it has a political component, it has a military component, but it's not just a city or a country. Has anybody taught anything or been taught, should I say, anything different from that at some point in time?
I have a question about
Okay.
that. Um, so what was the level of sophistication of that culture? And I mean, I don't know if that's the right question, but they 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 ruled so much area. Um, what was it like then, I guess?
For their day, pretty good. They're rivaling Egypt in power and technology. Have you ever heard of something called the Baghdad Battery?
I don't think so.
Billy, you want to explain the Baghdad Battery?
Actually, I never heard of that term till you just said that.
Really? Okay.
Baghdad Battery?
Baghdad Battery. In the 1890s, German
Oh, it's
archaeologists,
history, so that's why I don't know it.
okay. Yeah, we've talked about it before, but in fact, you mentioned it.
Okay, that's my old man brain then.
Okay, it's your old man brain. Here's the deal. In the 1890s, when archaeology is a new thing and they finally learn how to read Egyptian and cuneiform and all this stuff,
Oh,
Germany,
now I remember it. Yes.
and England are all over digging up places in these ancient cities and these artifacts. Well, a German team goes to Baghdad, Iraq, and they find some big jars. But these jars aren't like normal wine jars. They're tarred and sealed around the top, and they have a cylinder inside them. That's one type of metal, and it has an iron rod in it. Well, if you know how a battery's made, you have two dissimilar metals inside a solution, whether it's salt water or acid or something else, it will create an electric field between the poles of the two metals. So, to answer your question, Marion, somebody had invented a battery 4,000 years ago. Nobody
Wow.
knows. They had figured out electrolysis 4,000 years ago and how to control the process.
Well, and there's a huge amounts of things that ancient man had figured out, and part of that was used to build the pyramids and stuff like that. Even
Yeah,
in the Americas, there were ancient cultures that produced some amazing things.
right. Well, we have the Antikythera mechanism found in the 1920s by sponge divers off the coast of the Greek island Antikythera. And it's a mechanical computer with such precision gears and cluster gears in it that nothing would be made like it until the 16th century in Europe with the Swiss watchmakers. Just look up on YouTube the Antikythera mechanism.
Yeah, and then we come up on what, 14, 1500s, and humanity lost their minds.
Yeah. So we're going to pick up now. We'd stopped at verse 8. Let's go ahead. And it was planted. Well, we read verse 8. So let's go to verse 9. Say, thus said the Master Yahweh, is it going to thrive? Is he not going to pull it up by its roots and cut off its fruit and let it wither? All of its sprouting leaves wither. without great power are many people to pluck it up by the roots. See, it is planted. Is it going to thrive? Verse 10. Would it not utterly wither when the east wind touches it? Wither in the beds where it grows. And the word of Jehovah, verse 11, came to me saying, please say to the rebellious house, we're talking about Israel, do you not know what this means? Say, see, the sovereign of Babel went to Jerusalem and took its sovereign's head and brought them with him to Babel. So even, he not only gives them the parable, he explains it to them. So nobody has to say, well, what do you mean by this? Just in
Quite
case you're not.
often,
Go ahead.
yeah, quite often prophecy in Scripture does that. It'll ask a question and answer it. Probably.
Yeah. Because what's Yah concerned with? Babylon? No, Israel. He's not concerned with Babylon, he's concerned with Israel. He's concerned only with Babel in the fact that his people, he's going to use Babylonian captivity to finally get rid of the absolute gross Canaanite child sacrifice religion out of their midst. And it takes that to finally get rid of that issue. So we're going to pick up in verse 13. And he took one of the royal seed and made a covenant with him, and put him under oath and took away the mighty of the land. So the rain would be brought low and not lift itself up, but guard his covenant that it might stand. But the royal seed, remember, but he rebelled against him by sending his messengers, now this is the other eagle, to Mitzrayim, to give him horses and many people. Shall he thrive? Now, would somebody go to 2 Kings, 2 Kings chapter 25, please, verses 2 to 7. I know that's a long read.
I have it if you'd like.
Please, thank you.
2 Kings 25, verse 2 through 7, you said, right?
Yeah, yes.
And and the city was besieged until the 11th year of sovereign Tzidkiyahu. By the 9th of the new moon, swelled. The moon part is in italics. It's not explicit there. By the 9th of the new, the scarcity of food had become so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then the city wall was breached, and all the men of battle at night by way of the gate between two walls, which was by the sovereign's garden, even though the Chazdim were still encamped all around against the city, and went by way of the desert plain. It has the sovereign, is what it's implying.
Mm-hmm.
And the army of the Chazdim pursued the sovereign and overtook him in the desert plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. And they seized the sovereign and brought him up to the sovereign of Babel at Riblah, and they pronounced sentence on him. And they slew the sons of Tzidkiyahu before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Tzidkiyahu, and bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babel.
So we already have our interpretation. We have our symbolism and our interpretation. We've looked at Jeremiah. We've looked at 2 Kings now. So when you start to study Ezekiel and Jeremiah, you also got to consider things like 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings. So you get the context. So we're going to pick up in verse 16. As I live, declares the Master Yehovah, in the place where the sovereign dwells, who set him up to reign, whose oath he despised, and whose covenant he broke, with him in the midst of Babel he shall die. And Pharaoh with his great army and great company is not going to help him in battle, when they heap up a siege mound and build a wall to cut off many souls or beings. And he despised the oath by breaking the covenant. And see, he was given his hand, and he has done all this. He is not going to escape. Therefore, thus said the Master Jehovah, see, as I live, my oath which he despised and my covenant which he broke, shall I not put it on his own head? Well, Frank, I thought the king of Babylon set him up and made an oath to him. What do you mean, as Jehovah says? What's going on there in verse 19? Let me read it again. Therefore, thus said the Master Jehovah, as I live, my oaths which he despised and my covenant which he broke, shall I not put it on his own head? How did Hezekiah break the oaths of Jehovah? I thought he made a contract with the king of Babylon to be the puppet president.
Obviously, he was breaking the Most High's Torah, his covenant.
Yes, we know that how from the book of Jeremiah and what they were doing.
Yes. And
So,
so,
yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
the Most High gets a little angry here because he keeps the covenant with Babel and breaks his covenant with the Most High, which
Well, he actually broke the
quite a
covenant with
few.
Babel. Billy, he broke the covenant with Babel too. Hezekiah did.
Yes.
He
Yeah.
made an
So,
alliance with Egypt. Go ahead.
right. But I mean, that's the problem. You know, he's relying on nation states instead of relying on the Most High. And this
That's
is what many of the kings of Israel start doing. They rely on their own abilities, and they rely on, like, I think King Saul was relying on what he thought was his ability. In fact, it was a gift from the Most High. That's what does him under. And also messing around with with what do you call it, soothsayers and stuff like that.
right.
But many of the kings of Israel, in fact, only if maybe a small handful would be considered somewhat a king that was held to the covenant of Abraham and the Torah.
But look how Saul despised the covenant,
Yes, he did. Yeah.
not just with the Most High, with the Gibeonites. Joshua accepted the covenant with the Gibeonites. Don't care if
Right,
they're Canaanites.
because he didn't realize that these um were Canaanites rather than some other nation.
But it
Remember,
doesn't. But
there
see,
was a swindle.
that was Saul's reasoning. They're Canaanites. We can break this covenant. They're just
Yeah,
Canaanites.
no. Right.
We don't understand the severity of covenants. Trust me, we don't.
I Well, we definitely don't respect it if we understand it.
You know, you remember the old saying, "He's a man of his word." You don't need, Yah's a man of his word. Yah
Mhm.
keeps covenant, and he expects his people to keep covenant.
It's just like what happened earlier in what you were reading here, where he says, "Is he going to?" I forget. I'm paraphrasing him. Is he going to survive? Oh no, he's not. We're going to
Yeah,
tear this to pieces here
yeah.
because it was breaching the Most High's commands.
Okay, I'm going to
So,
pick up.
Frank, I have a quick question.
No
You were
problem.
talking about Hezekiah. What's the sequence? I thought
What?
Zedekiah was
Zedekiah. Did I say Hezekiah? It's probably Zedekiah. I'm sorry.
okay. So he was the puppet king for Nebuchadnezzar, correct?
Right. He was
Okay.
part of the royal house. He
Okay.
was appointed by Nebuchadnezzar during the first invasion. They keep fighting against the Babylonians, even though Jeremiah has told them, stop it. You know,
Who keeps fighting?
the Israelites.
Keeps fighting the Babylonians?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I got it now. Thank you. I was a little
Yeah.
confused there.
Okay. So this is the whole thing. They had a covenant. They could have stayed in the land. They wouldn't have been dispersed all over the place if they'd just kept the covenant. Now, we're not even talking about Yah's covenant there. We're talking about the covenant with Babylon.
So I'm going to ask a question I know the answer
Okay.
to. Um, why would the Most High be upset about dishonoring a covenant that Israel made with any nation? That's for others to answer. Come on, folks. Anybody?
I already know. We've talked about it, but
Well, let your
I
yes
didn't
be
hear the
yes and
question.
your no be no.
Can you repeat the question?
Why would the Most High be so upset with Israel for breaking a covenant with a nation that is not the greatest people in the world? So I ask a different question. Um, if you raised your children to be um, good for their word, right? And they made a covenant with somebody and then broke it, wouldn't you be angry about that? And that's what's going on here. The Most High is saying, look, you guys, okay, I get it. You screwed up. You didn't realize who these people were, but you made a covenant with these people. You made a covenant. Do you understand? The covenant should not be broken. And so breaking it with a nation that isn't the best friend of the Most High, the problem is that it's not Israel that gets defamed, it's the Most High. It defames the Most High because Israel is his child, is his people. And that reflects on the Most High.
I think I have a pretty good answer, but I'm going to make y'all wait till Sabbath.
no. Make them wait. Oh, golly, you're mean. Well, let's talk about trees some more because we got to get on to Matthew. Trees and 23. 23 and me went bankrupt, by the way, so I hope you didn't have any of your DNA data there. Y'all didn't key on that.
The
First,
year 23?
no, 23 and me, the genetic site went bankrupt and they're holding all people's genetic records and they are in bad shape. So I was just looking at verse 23 because we're talking about trees.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I don't care.
Well, if you don't have your DNA there, you're okay. But, maybe that's another story. Rabbit
Well, I
trail.
bled all over the place, so it might be there.
Yeah. Verse 23 of this chapter 17. On the mountain heights of Israel, I planted it, remember chapter 5, the vine, and it shall bring forth branches and bear fruit and become a big cedar. Remember, first, when we started this chapter, the top of the cedar is cut off. That's the king. And under it shall dwell birds. Pay attention to this language because of every sort. In the shadow of its branches they shall dwell. If Israel's the cedar that's planted and birds dwell under it, we have a prophecy here. Would y'all like the explanation to the prophecy?
Yes.
Go to Luke chapter 13 and read me verse 19.
I'm there. Luke 13, verse 19.
Yes.
It is like a mustard seed which a man took and threw into his garden. And it grew and became a large tree, and the birds of the heavens nested in its branches.
Oh, what do you know? Birds in a mustard plant. See, Israel starts out as a cedar, but because she's been diminished by her rebellion, the kingdom now that was promised to the sons of the rain, others, birds, nations, are going to go into the kingdom. Yeshua says to the Pharisees and the Sadducees that other people will sit with Abraham, Isaac, and Yitzhak in the kingdom, and you'll be cast out. And if you read Luke about the mustard seed, it's about the kingdom. Israel was a kingdom under which all nations could rest. She was once mighty, but because of hardness of heart, now she's just a little mustard plant. She has to regrow. She's not going to be done away. Do you see the connection there? Both of them have birds resting in their branches. But the reason the mustard seed succeeds is because the one who doesn't break covenant plants it.
And as parables go, the mustard seed can grow to a mighty plant.
Tree, right. Well, let's jump over to Judges. Let's look at this. Judges chapter 9, starting at verse 8. Judges chapter 9, starting at verse 8. The trees went forth to anoint a sovereign over them. And they said to the olive tree, reign over us. And the olive tree said, shall I leave my oil with which they esteem mighty ones and men, and go to sway over the trees? Then the tree said to the fig tree, come and reign over us. And the fig tree said to them, shall I leave my sweetness and my good fruit, and go to sway over the trees? Then the tree said to the vine, come and reign over us. And the vine said to them, shall I leave my new wine, which rejoices mighty ones and men, and go to sway over other trees? Then all the trees said to the bramble, the thorn bush, come and reign over us. And the bramble said to the trees, if in truth you anoint me, or Mashiach me, as sovereign over you, come take shelter in my shade. But if not, let fire come out from the bramble and devour the cedar of Lebanon. Who's the cedar of Lebanon? Back in Ezekiel, Israel. You see this constant metaphor, even as far back as the Judges.
What was the reference there in Judges?
Judges chapter 9, verses 8, pretty much to the end of the chapter, to verse 20. Now we're going to talk about some interesting trees. And I might get Garrett to talk about this one tree. Garrett, would you be willing to talk about the great tree, the ash called Yggdrasil?
You're a funny guy.
Okay, I'll do it. He knows what I'm talking about. Most of y'all probably don't know the mythology.
Yggdrasil is the Nordic cosmology. That's the tree which Odin hangs from to gain wisdom. And it's like this great cosmic tree that runs through the navel of the earth and essentially supplies life and knowledge. And think of, like, from a flat earth point of view, you have like this tree that runs through like an umbilical cord, like in the belly button, and it supplies the earth with all the sustenance. This is where Odin seeks his divine, his magical, spiritual,
Right.
whatever. And so that's what this mystical tree is in Nordic mythology, Yggdrasil, right?
Right.
And
Go
the
ahead.
imagery is shared throughout Greco-Roman and Sumerian and Babylonian, and they a lot of them, other surrounding ancient nations, share similar imagery with the great world tree that goes through the center of the flat earth, essentially. But it's they all do their own take on it. They all
Right.
have their own little spin.
Well, here's the interesting thing, and so it's got the 9 worlds of the 9 realms, correct?
Yes.
And if you see a image of this tree, it's usually kind of look like big teardrops that representing the 9 worlds of the 9 realms. So
Yes.
there's
There are
different.
9 branches on this tree, Yggdrasil, and then they're all sustained and eventually tied into the trunk of the tree. And
Right.
so you have these little universes essentially that they're all at the end of their respective branches.
Right. See, Messiah tells us we got to be grafted into him. Guess what? The Kabbalistic tree of Kabbalistic Judaism has 10 spheres on it, and this other tree has 9. So a Kabbalist and a pagan understand biblical imagery because they use it.
Right.
This is
Yeah,
the
in
thing.
fact, they make the statement about the 10. It says 10 and not 9, 10 and not 11.
You're right.
It makes it explicit like that.
Explicit.
Kabbalah.
So isn't this interesting that the Kabbalist has a tree that has 10 spheres or sephirot, and the pagan has a tree that has 9, and but there's the similar imagery. Let's go back to the first 2 trees of imagery. Because Yah's using this. This is not new. We should understand the imagery. Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Would somebody please read that?
I have it, Frank.
Go ahead.
2, 8, and 9.
Right.
And Yehovah Elohim planted a garden in Eden to the east, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And out of the ground Yehovah Elohim made every tree grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, with the tree of life in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Okay. Wow. Now let me paint you an image here. The word Kabbalah means to receive, right, Billy?
Yes, that's correct.
I've got 2 trees. Let's call the knowledge of good and evil Yggdrasil, and let's call the other one life. Do I want paganism and its imagery in my life, or do I want Yah's revelation in my life? Which of the 2 trees do I choose?
Well, and that is exactly what the Most High is trying to tell you. It's that easy. The decision is just that. Do you want good, great things, whatever, or what in this life, or do you want the everlasting life with the Most High? And it's okay. You can choose whichever one you want. He's okay with that.
Somebody else was going to say something. Go ahead.
I was just this tree imagery. I've never in all my wanderings thought to connect Yggdrasil with the tree of knowledge of good and evil in Eden, and think of them both, because that's a man. I'm sitting here trying to chew on that. That's tough
They're
because
both side by side.
right, it really works. I would have never thought that worked so well, but think about the whole thing, like what I just said with Odin trying to hang from this tree to seek knowledge. That's what makes Odin the supreme deity of the Nordic cosmology, is that he's got this set of knowledge and connection and power that no other of the lesser gods can touch him, because he's connected with this thing, this tree of knowledge, the Yggdrasil. That's what it is. I mean, and by definition, that's what the Odin worshippers call it. You know, Odin hung upside down from this tree for a length of time and received knowledge. And if you tie that in with Eden, it's like that's literally called in Genesis the tree of knowledge of good and evil.
So a pagan would understand the gospel.
Dude, that just it's because of my weird little wandering that I had for a short time in paganism, it's like that slaps because it's so obvious, and I've never would have connected the two until you just said it. But yes, yeah, that's it's. You could make a good case that Yggdrasil is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It works in
I
every
think I
way.
just made the case.
It works every way. There's no way in which it doesn't work. And then you got the deceiver that takes Adam and Eve and gets them to eat of the tree. Yeah, that works.
I think I have made my point about understanding biblical imagery, taking you all the way back, and trees. But to beat the horse a little more before we move on to Matthew 23, would somebody please look up Matthew chapter 7, verses 17 and 18?
I'm there if you want it.
Okay, please.
Chapter 7, 17. Every good tree yields good fruit, but a rotten tree yields wicked fruit. A good tree is unable to yield wicked fruit, and a rotten tree to yield good fruit.
Two trees. Knowledge of good and evil.
One's wicked, one's good.
One's good.
You know, guys, my brother, my little brother, was following even a Messianic congregation for a short time. Now, guess what he's into and what he believes in, and he doesn't care about anything else. Exactly what you guys were talking about.
Odinism, yep.
So, and Frank, you just said that if somebody who looks at this at the Odinism or whatever you want to call it, then they should understand Scripture. Well, this guy is sharp. My brother is very sharp. He's probably well, my oldest brother would have been the sharpest. I'm the dull point. He's also very sharp, intelligence-wise. But the guy has given his whole life up to this nonsense crap that this Odin junk. And it's his choice. And he does it almost thumbing his nose at the Most High. It's messed up.
Well, guys, I'm thankful that Yah offered y'all the choice and you chose well. Billy, Garrett, and others. Eat of the tree of life, not of the tree of knowledge.
Yes.
Let's finish up the chapter. Verse 24. And all the trees of the field shall know that I, Yahavah, have brought down the high tree and exalted the low tree. Remember we talked about dried up the green tree. What did Yeshua do to the fig tree? And made the dry tree flourish. I, Yehovah, have spoken it, and I shall do it. One more verse, Romans 11:17. Someone, please.
Romans 11, you say?
Chapter 11, verse 17. Thank you.
If some of the branches were broken off, and you, being a wild olive tree, have been grafted in among them, and came to share the root and fatness of the olive tree, do not boast against the branches. And if you boast, remember, you do not bear the root, but the root you. You shall say then, the branches were broken off, that I might be grafted in.
Here we go. More the same imagery.
Oh, read the next verse. Just
Okay.
You got to do that, but you got to do it with pizzazz.
Somebody
Okay.
pizzazz me.
So I got to read 19 and 20 together because
Okay.
you shall say then the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Good. By unbelief they were broken off, and you stand by belief. Do not be arrogant, but fear. Don't forget that part.
See, we have a privilege. We've been grafted into the covenant of Israel. We haven't replaced the Jew. We've simply been grafted into the olive tree
Among them.
among them. Fear Elohim.
And then the next verse, if Elohim didn't spare the natural branches, he might not spare you either.
Wow.
Exactly. Yep. Be careful.
Well, guys, have we learned something about trees and covenants?
Dang it. That's hard.
Yeah, I think I learned that we're supposed to plant in spring.
Some good stuff, guys. Some very good stuff. Verse 23 of Matthew. Chapter 23 of Matthew. We're in chapter 23 of Matthew now. Let's see what time it is. Okay, it's like 15 after 8, so we got about 45 minutes. We're going to hit some of the important points here. Let's see if I can offend somebody. Then I will say, I've done my job. No, I'm not trying to be that bad. Chapter 23 of Matthew, verse 1. Then Yahushua spoke to the crowds. Remember, he's at the temple, and to his disciples, or his taught ones, saying, the scribes and Pharisees sit on the seat of Moshe. Therefore, whatever they say to you to guard, guard and do, but do not do according to their works, for they say and don't do. Now, if you go to the Shem Tov Matthew, that's in St. Petersburg,
Right.
Russia, it doesn't read whatever, do to you, whatever they say. It doesn't say that. It says whatever he says. Who's he? Moses. Whatever Moses says to you, do. Not the scribes and Pharisees.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if, according to the accusation, the Shem Tov Matthew was written by Pharisees, why wouldn't he leave this Greek rendering in there? Do what they say. See, a lot of people attack that text as, we've got this Greek text. There's some things just showing up in your scriptures that are just different when you look at that text, and you can get it online. I'm trying to think of the man that first did the big translation. He wrote his doctoral thesis on it. He's dead now. He's a Christian, not a Jew. Nehemiah Gordon does a lot of in-depth stuff on the Hebrew Matthew there. But do what Moses says is how the text is rendered in the Shem Tov. For what do they do? But do not do according to their works, for they say and don't do. For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but with their finger they do not move them. Takanot and Masasim, the commandments, the injunctions, the rules, and the regulations of the rabbis. And the way to hell is paved with good intentions. Oh, you're not going to be able to sin because we put so many fences around the commandment. Don't worry, we took care of you. You can feel righteous because we've made ways so you can't violate the commandment. Did anybody think to ask Yah if he wanted that? Verse 5, they say to do all, and they do all their works to be seen by men, and they make their tefillin wide and lengthen their tzitzit of their garments. Now, he doesn't say that tefillin and tzitzit are bad, but boy, they decorate theirs, they widen theirs. I won't get on that rant too much. Actually, Judaism has standardized its tefillin. You don't find different variations. Maybe they learned from this. And how long do you need your tzitzit, you know? Verse
Well, the
6.
tzitzit thing hasn't been standardized, not that
No, it
I've seen.
hadn't. And they loved the best places at the feast. What are the feasts, right? And the best places in the congregations or synagogue. And the greetings in the marketplace to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi.
So, Frank, that's why they actually sell seats in the synagogues.
Yes.
You know that, right?
Yes, I know that.
The more money you have, the better seat you get.
Now look at this. Here's the one thing Yeshua says that Messianic Jewish guys paid no attention to. In fact, they write whole teachings to try to countermand it. I wish I still had one. I had one by a Messianic rabbi. I think it was 18 pages, single spaced. But you do not be called rabbi. But you do not be called rabbi. How many of these guys running around in the Messianic movement, rabbi? I mean, if at least you've been schmicked or ordained as an Orthodox guy, okay, maybe you have something to brag about. But I've met guys calling themselves rabbi that can't speak a lick of Hebrew. For one is your teacher. Now he said, oh, well, that just means teacher. It means more than that. Rabbi actually means great one, a great teacher. The Messiah. You have one teacher, the Messiah. And you are all brothers. And do not be called, and do not call on earth Father, for one is your Father who is in heaven. Oh, well, what do we call, what what particular religious custom calls their religious big guys
Yeah,
fathers?
let me explain that just a little bit. He's not telling people that you should not call your biological dad father. He's not saying that. What happened was during that time, the lesser rabbis were calling the greater rabbis father.
Yes, that's the historical context. Now here's another one. So I don't know what we're going to call ourselves. Servants, probably is best. Eved, and somebody's phone's ringing, and it's mine. Gosh, I thought I cut that off. Shame on me. Somebody call Elizabeth for me. Okay. And neither be called leaders, verse 10. Well, what's that lead? I haven't looked up the Greek there. Pardon me. For one is, for one is your leader, the Messiah. But the greatest among you shall be called servant or eved. So just in case I say I'm anything other than y'all's servant, correct me. Keep me humble.
Question,
Yes.
why do you think Yeshua in verse 8 and verse 10 is talking in third person?
Well, who's there? Him, the disciples, and who else is there?
Verse 1, there's a crowd present.
Yes. And within that crowd were a bunch of the rabbis, a bunch of the Pharisees and the Sadducees and everything.
Uh-huh.
He was hammering these guys.
But he could have continued in first person and said, for one is your teacher, but
Right.
then he says the Messiah.
He does. Because
Oh,
the crowds, he's not going to make it plain to them that he's the Messiah.
well, the other thing too is that Yeshua in that position right there is not speaking for himself. He's allowing the Father to speak through him. And so the Father's talking in third person.
Billy, would you go ahead and pick this up? I don't know if my daughter has need of me. I need to call her back, so I'm gonna kind of put the mic on pause
Okay.
and okay.
So anyway, that's why that's going to. Every time he spoke that way, he was allowing the Father to speak, to speak through him. At least that's what I think is going on.
Yeah, but 9, if you go to 9, he's referring to the Father.
Yes.
So
He
that would
is.
be,
That's correct. He is. And
Yeah.
do not call on earth your Father. Don't call anyone. They have to put anyone in there because it kind of doesn't make sense in English. But for only the Echad is your Father, he who is in the heavens. So when he speaks that way, remember, now he has to talk about his Father. So he can't be talking as the Father if he's speaking about his Father. So he has to become the Son again. You understand? He's pulling these different what we call where we get mixed up in English and stuff. This first and second and third person and all that kind of stuff. In Hebrew, it exists. This is true, but it's not as weird to speak in third person or second person, that kind of stuff, as it is in English and be facing someone and be speaking in the third person.
I think also, if I could make a point here, like whenever my son was playing little league basketball in the past couple months, and he he was the hardest kid to coach out of the whole team, and it drove me crazy because I'm looking at my own son arguing with me. This kid would run up and down the court middle of the game arguing with me, and I was like beside myself because of all the kids that wasn't going to be able to reach. I didn't think it'd be my own son. It drove me nuts. And he long story short, I don't want to get into my family drama, but long story short, I pulled him to the side and said, he was talking about not wanting to listen. I don't have to listen, Dad. I can just try to play the game the way I want to play. And it's only his second year playing basketball, and he's still barely learning the rules. And I said, okay, Corbin, fine. You can do stuff your own way, sure, if you want to. And you cannot listen to advice if that's your choice. There's lots of advice out there. All these people in the stands are yelling. Your mother's yelling. Your grandma, my mom is yelling. You heard all these voices, but all the voices that you're choosing to drown out, the one voice that you should listen to is your coach.
Oh, so you were beside yourself. That's why you were speaking in third person?
Yeah, and there you go. And because well, maybe next year I won't be his coach, right? But
Yeah.
this year I am his coach, and so the lesson stands. You listen to your stinking coach, kid, because your coach isn't putting in his time and his effort to coach you in the wrong direction. Your coach has a vested interest in seeing you succeed, and so and so of course I was his coach in that moment, but now he's done with basketball and he's doing baseball, and so the point stands. And in that moment, I referred to myself in the third person. I guess you should listen to your coach, but he gets it. He didn't quite accept it, but he gets it. And I'm not saying listen to your dad. Listen to me. I'm saying your coach. And because the title is the title carries importance if you're a kid playing a team sport, coach. In
The
that moment,
title carries the authority.
right. And so back to Yeshua here, he's telling us the people in the crowd, you have one teacher, the Messiah. I think there's an implication that the Messiah is greater than Moses, is the point, or whoever's sitting in the throne of Moses. The Messiah is greater than him. And so there's a hint there at that. And so, and also, aside, and that's again, that's my own speculation, but I think there's a hint there that the Messiah is greater than Moses. But also, he's speaking he's speaking outside of time in a way. He knows his words are going to be recorded and passed down from generation to generation. And so the people in the crowd, maybe there's some that will and some that will not accept him, but he can't really make a hill of beans out of one or the other, because they're going to see him hang on the stake in a couple weeks or months, and so
Yeah. Well, actually, about 3 more days.
right, and so he's sitting here and trying to beat, there's a couple of naysayers in the crowd and trying to beat him over the head by proclaiming himself as the Mashiach isn't going to win him any favors in the moment.
Well, see, this is what I said. He wasn't openly saying he's the Messiah. But get this,
Is-
why would you think, well, where's the Messiah? The question of the crowd should have been, okay, we want to follow the Messiah. Who is he? Where is he at?
So yeah, because here's the deal. David was a Mashiach. He had been Mashiach into that position. So was King Saul, one of the kind of best and worst we had. Shlomo was Mashiach. All of the kings of Israel had to be Mashiach into their position. So, in a real way, he could have been talking about the king at the time, but he wasn't. He was talking about himself. But it only because of context does it make it about him. But he could have been talking about any leader of Israel,
Well, see, here's the
any
thing.
Mashiach of Israel.
Garrett is the boy's dad, but at that point in time, he's the coach. That's a different office.
Right. He's the anointed one at that moment.
Did that make any sense, Iris? Because you asked the question about the first and third person.
Yeah, I can understand the point.
He
Yes.
he is indirectly saying he's the Mashiach, and nobody's getting it. I don't think.
Right. And like Frank said, it's only a few days here, and he's going to be hung on a stake. So the idea of trying to get people to understand your Messiah is going to be hung on a stake. Why? First of all, it was prophesized that way. And then second of all, if he doesn't do that, then there's no lamb. And
Right.
all the other things. Everybody knows the rest of that stuff.
Well, as he changes this story, he moves from his disciples and the group and people gathered, the crowd, however big that is, and he focuses on the scribes and the Pharisees. Verse 13. I'm of the opinion that the scribes, many of them might have been the Essenes. But that's my opinion. And the reason is because they were known for writing everything down.
Now he's saying this to them.
Right.
And just listen to what he says in the first part there. Go ahead.
But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you shut up the kingdom of heaven. Religion. They're religion. They're doing the religious stuff. And they look good to men. How many churches, denominations, sects, religious organizations that have shut up the kingdom?
You didn't say that quite right. Let me say it quite right.
Okay, you say it better then?
Woe to you,
okay,
scribes, Pharisees, you hypocrites. That's what he was saying. And he said it with that kind of power. I'm convinced of that. Yeah. Because you shut up the reign of the heavens before men, for you do not go in, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. I mean, that is a condemnation that is really heavy. And I don't think it's opaque to the people he's talking to.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the whole thing's about the kingdom. That's why I say, people say, well, why hadn't Yeshua or Jesus, whatever they call him, returned? Well, because the gospel of the kingdom really hadn't been preached. I'm sorry. We had a gospel preached to us, but it's not the gospel of the kingdom. And it's not just me saying that. I have a video I might play sometime. It's a Baptist pastor saying that people have done this. It's this idea that Paul's gospel and Jesus's gospel, I'm using his language, it's different gospels, and that today we're supposed to follow the gospel of Paul, not the gospel of Jesus. Because why is he addressing that?
It's a wonder anybody has any understanding out there. Jeez.
Right. Well, he's addressing three independent fundamental Baptist well-known preachers in their false teaching about the gospel of Paul versus the gospel of Jesus. Verse 15, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you go about the land and the sea to make one convert. Oh, going to make converts. You know, Scripture tells us to make Talmudim disciples, not converts. A lot of people knock on the door. They're going to tell you,
Yes.
say the sinner's prayer, give you the magazine, whatever. And I've literally seen this happen at an independent fundamental Baptist church and with the Jehovah Witness. At the independent fundamental Baptist church in Corpus Christi, Texas, and I can name, there's about 3 of them that I know of. They go out every Saturday soul winning. They go to doors, they knock on doors, they get some people to say the sinner's prayer. They write the name in the book and say, well, now I've made this person got saved. They said the sinner's prayer. Why do I know this? Because some of my relatives went to that church. And
With
yet
every
the church,
head bowed and every eye closed.
right. Well, the whole point is the church, anytime you would go there, any Sunday, morning or evening, they ran about 60 people. You're going out making anywhere between 3 and 15 so-called conversions every week, and yet you never grow. Nobody comes to your church. Something wrong there. You got them to say a prayer so you would get off their doorstep. You know, that's my same with the Jehovah Witness. They want, oh, you know, they say they're preaching the kingdom, but they've got their own little peculiar doctrine that if you don't adhere to, nobody else is getting in unless you're part of their club.
So saying the magic words isn't what it takes, Frank. That's not.
No, that's not what it takes.
Maybe they'd have been better off hanging from the great tree Yggdrasil.
Yes. And he got this whole polemic, this whole thing against from verses 13 all the way to verse 29 is a scathing rebuke of the Pharisees and the scribes. I mean, he says stuff, for instance, let me see what our timestamp is. Hold on, please. Oh, okay.
8:36.
Really? I thought it was later than that. Okay. He talks about, for instance, them making oaths. Oaths is a big deal. Woe to you, blind guides, verse 16, who say, whoever swears by the temple or the dwelling place, it doesn't matter, but whoever swears by the gold of the dwelling place is bound by oath. Fools and blind, verse 17, for which is greater, the gold or the set apart or holy place? Whoever swears by the slaughter place, it does not matter, but whoever swears by the gift that's on it is bound. You see all these little oath things, all these little, you know, theological tricks they're doing. All them, they're crossing their fingers. They're Christians crossing their fingers. You got to study that. You want to learn to understand some what that really means. I bet most people don't know what crossing your fingers really means. You know, we'll play that video. Yeah. So anyhow, as he goes down through this, they talk about verse 25. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are filled with plunder and unrighteousness. He says you look good on the outside, but your inside's the problem. Inside's always the problem.
Well, you got 23 there. Woe to you, scribes,
Yeah,
Pharisees, hypocrites, because you tithe the mint and the anise and the cumin and have neglected the weightier of the Torah, the right ruling and the compassion and the belief.
he didn't say you shouldn't tithe. He says you've neglected the most important part of the Torah.
Exactly.
Well, he goes through all of this and he says, down through here, hypocrites. verse 26. I read 25. I was going to jump back to 20. But anyhow, blind Pharisees first clean the inside of the cup and the dish so that the outside then becomes clean too. Now, the question is, how do you clean the inside of the dish? I mean, literally, if we're talking about cleaning a dish, I know how, but how do you clean your inside? Because he doesn't say ask God to cleanse you. He says you do it.
By allowing the word of the Most High to change you inside.
Yes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you are like whitewashed tombs, which are outwardly look well, but inside they're full of dead men's bones. So you too outwardly to appear righteous to men, but inside you're filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. There's that term lawlessness. Crops up a lot. I thought these guys were the law keepers. I thought Phariseeism's whole premise was we keep the law better than anybody else.
So Matthew, when he says, you get lawlessness there, that's actually Torahlessness.
Yes.
In fact, that's what brought me into the Messianic stuff is that understanding that lawlessness meant Torahlessness. Something I had no idea what it was, and I had to go find out what this Torah was.
But Billy, they didn't tell you that you can't do it. See, he just said you clean it up. The Pastor Dogood says you just can't do it. Why try?
Yes, I know. Which is, again, why I started dropping out of those kinds of things.
But
Whether
yeah.
we can or cannot do it is actually really not the point. The point is try the best you can. There's no one that keeps the law perfect except the master. That keeps the Torah perfect except the master. It's our job to do the best we can.
Well, see, that's
And
the point. He doesn't relieve them of responsibility. If it was just a
correct.
matter of, oh, it's just what you believe, he's
Yeah.
telling them it's what you do. That's why I brought up this one particular Baptist pastor, because there's a teaching, and I don't know if it's in every church, I don't know if it's in every Baptist church, but amongst certain groups of fundamental Baptists, is basically you can't do it, why try? In other words, you can't do anything. You just got to believe him.
Yeah, just put it all in his hands. No, that's not what he did. He put it all in our hands.
Yeah.
You need to do that. You need to work this out with fear and trembling. I mean,
Well, yeah,
Christian churches do that all the time, don't they?
you're
Right?
paraphrasing Paul, but the whole
Yeah.
thing let's take any crime that men commit, which is against Scripture and against the laws of man. You would not go into a court unless you were an absolute insane moron and say, I just can't keep the law, Judge. You got
So
to
I'm
let me
just going
go.
to, and by the way, there's some people that do that.
Yeah, they're called insane.
Yes.
You know, they're probably trying to pull an
Yeah.
insanity plea
That's
and
when
get
the
this.
court-appointed attorney stands up and says, Your Honor, forgive my client. He doesn't know what he's talking about. We're going to throw out the last thing he said, and then we're going to forbid him from speaking in court
Yeah.
ever again. Make him be quiet for his own sake.
Okay, what do we got here? Because we're probably finishing a little bit early. I didn't think we'd finish this early, but we stopped at verse 28. He says, So you too outwardly indeed appear righteous to men, but inside you are filled with hypocrisy and lawlessness. So we do the Torah, like Billy said. Well, what if I do fail? What does it say? I would that you sin not, but if you do, you have an advocate with the Father, Yeshua the righteous. Am I quoting James or John there? I know it's, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, verse 29, because you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the day of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in the blood of the prophets. Verse 31, thus you bear witness against yourself that you are the sons of those who murdered the prophets. Wow.
Oops.
Easily the heaviest accusation in the chapter.
And you filled up the measure of your fathers. Verse 33, serpents, brood of adders, how would you escape the judgment of Gehenna? Because of this, see, I send you prophets and wise men and scholars. Some of them you shall kill and impale, some of them you shall flog in your congregations and persecute from city to city, so that on you should come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Bechariah, whom you murdered between the dwelling place and the altar of the slaughter place. There's a whole history on that guy. I wish I'd have just printed that out. Who he's referring to?
Zechariah, you mean?
Yeah, Zechariah, son of Berechiah, is a particular person, and I just didn't forgot to print it. I was going to read who that is. But I mean, this is a very pointed accusation. Truly I say to you, all this shall come upon this generation. See, this is the whole point. Everybody thinks, well, that in the preterist view of eschatology or end time of things, that's why they believe that everything was fulfilled by AD 70. But he is talking to that generation, and there is a judgment that came on that generation, the destruction not only of the temple in Jerusalem, but a massive loss of Jewish life in the first and then the second rebellion. A very massive loss of Jewish life. And then he weeps over Jerusalem. Verse 36, truly I say to you, all this shall come upon this generation. And it did. But then he says, verse 37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who are sent to her. How often I wish to gather your children together, the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wing, but you would not. When we go all the way back to Ezekiel in chapter 16, it starts as the prophecy of Jerusalem. So he's saying, I was back there. I would have gathered you, but you would not. Now, this is important here because he quotes Jeremiah 22:5 and says, see, your house is left to you desolate. Which house is going to be left desolate? We've talked about this, and there's, it's written in the Talmud. I need to find that after the crucifixion of Messiah, after a certain point, the scarlet thread tied no longer changed white when they sent the goat out into the wilderness. For I say to you, from now on, you shall by no means see me until you say, Baruch haba Bashem Yehovah.
Hey,
Blessed
Frank, you got that right.
yes. See, once in a while I get something right. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Yehovah. Psalm 118, verse 26. Is there any other questions? Any other comments or thoughts? We've got about 10, 12 minutes left here. If I can't answer it, and probably I can't, Billy might be able to.
I don't know about that.
I'll ask a question. In verse 37, when it talks about a way a hen gathers her chickens under her wings,
Yes.
but you would not. Didn't we see that imagery about the eagle and the wings, and chicken's hardly comparable to an eagle,
Right.
but there's the same imagery.
Yes.
I mean, Is there? I guess is the question.
Well, so, but there's a, as you probably know, there is a huge difference between the way a mother hen will bring the chickens in underneath them and the eagle. So you don't see an eagle walking around with the chicks underneath them. What you do see is the eagle trying to teach them to fly by going down below them and lifting them up and getting them to come back up. The mother hen puffs out, covers over, and you can't even tell that she's got anything under there. So that's why he uses the chicken metaphor, because the chicken's really, once she pulls those chicks underneath her, you'll have no idea that she even has any chicks until they start coming out from underneath her again. At least
Okay.
that's what I think.
I didn't see the chat. We got some chats here. Okay.
Yeah, the chicken, the mama chicken and her babies, they fascinate me. They're not there. Where's the chickens? I mean, several times I've walked out there. Where's all the little chicks? Where's all the little chicks? All of a sudden, the mama starts going to where we're putting the feed and lets the little babies out. And they're like, oh, yeah, wow.
Is there any other thoughts or questions?
Well, in Matthew, this part of Matthew, he basically seals his fate with what he's saying to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the guys calling themselves rabbis and stuff like that. If they weren't sure before, they are now that they have to kill him.
Well, you want to tell the story about why he had to die? One way or the other? The Caiaphas story?
Well, there's a couple of those, isn't there? In order to get the Northern Kingdom, who he in fact is divorced back, somebody has to die there.
Yes.
And the person that comes back isn't the exact same person. They're not exactly equivalent. In fact, the one that comes back is much greater than the human that he had to become. So he has to die for that reason. He also has to die because there's none of us that are qualified to be the sinless or a spotless lamb for the sacrifice of sin, the final sin sacrifice. And I've told some people that even the Jews agree that when the Mashiach comes, the sin sacrifice will be done away with, because the Messiah would have covered that. It's so funny. They have so much of what, especially in the Orthodox Hasids, which is the ones I've looked at most, they have a lot of understanding that's in the New Testament about the Messiah. And you would think that after they read the New Testament, they would say, hey, wow, there he is. We missed him.
Yeah.
But no, they're not going to admit that. Nope.